Welcome back to another ground up SCX24 build, and today I'm going to be doing a bit of a mashup here between Mazz Designs and WTMicro. So you can see I've got a WTMicro FJ45 cab only body painted up, detailed, and ready to go for the build. I've also got some Mazz Designs carbon cheat code XL rails sitting here ready and waiting. And the item in the middle is what's going to make this possible. These are some brand new prototype sliders from Mazz Designs, specifically created to mate up to the FJ45 cab only and the short bed FJ45 truck. And I believe they'll probably work with the two longer versions as well. They just, of course, won't reach to the back of the cab. But that's what we've got here. So I think first off, since I've got the body ready to go, I think we're gonna jump in, take a look at this chassis, what comes with that, and then we'll get to the assembly. So sit back, relax, and let's start cheating. Let's take a quick look at this V2 cheat code chassis kit. So the components you get here are the skid, the ESC tray, the sliders. You get 3 cross braces, 2 of those with magnet mounts. He gives you magnets and also some micro nuts. Other than that, you're going to need to provide your own hardware. But specifically, what is unique about this chassis versus the V1 cheat code is obviously the slots here on the rails. That's new. These slots actually work with this new design tray. So that allows this guy to slide up and down along here, so you can mount low, high, forward, back, however you need to clear the drive shaft, the links, which is a really nice little innovation there. I can also notice the slots here for the transmission skid, so it looks like you're able to shift that forward slightly as well. Otherwise, it looks like the geometry basically remains unchanged from the V1. So on these sliders, they are set up for that forward shifted transmission as well. So these are V2 sliders, but it looks like these are the same setup with the straight little rail for the Proline cliffhanger body. So I've got a V1 right here, and we take a look here at the kind of the ESC tray. So no slots, so that is a static mount, and that actually gave me some fitment issues with my drive shaft. I actually had to clearance it out with the Dremel for the links and the drive shaft. So that new slotted solution, I think, is going to be a really good design innovation there for the build. And then of course you'll be able to shift the transmission and motor forward if you desire to do that. Of course, you'd want to probably shorten these front links, or you would just be pushing everything forward. You wouldn't really gain anything from it, but other than that, you can see the general shape is basically the same as far as the chassis rails. Looks like the cross braces have been redesigned a little on the V2, but very, very similar. So I think with that, let's take a quick look at what you get with the WTMicro kit. So obviously you get the cab, you get the roof panel, you get the front grille, 2 lenses, magnet set up here, and then you get another set of sliders. So that's 3 total that we've got on hand now. So these are the WTMicro sliders designed around the Injora or the OGRC LCG carbon fiber chassis with a, I believe, like a 6-degree angled skid. So you can see that here, they take into account that angle. So if you're building this on a non-cheat code, you want to build this around the Injora or the OGRC LCG chassis to use these guys as just straight up bolt on. But that's the kit right there. Basically everything you need to complete it. Of course, it does come raw resin. So I think since I've got it all complete and detailed, I may as well take you through the process real quick and get you up to speed. But I gotta say, that mica red came out looking just really nice. especially with the semi-gloss to seal it in. I think that looks just great. The panel lines just pop against that red. I think this thing is going to look stellar once we get it all complete. Speaking of complete, I think we're going to need a few more items to get this guy rolling. So I think let's get to the other parts and then we can assemble this guy. Here we are with all the sub-assemblies completed. So I think I'll go over a few of the new to me parts. The first of which would be the stainless steel links here from Mazz Designs. So these are fairly new to the market, and they've got these offset rod ends here, as you see. So they've got 3 different head styles. So the smooth offset heads go on the lower links at the skid. So you can see those are smooth, versus these other ones that are bent. They have a hex kind of head around them. So not too difficult at all, but you do need to pay attention when you're putting them together and kind of think about what you're doing. A little more than typical with links. The second item would be the rear link riser. So this is from Ramp Crab, and as you saw, it's adjustable. So it's got vertical positions, but what makes it unique is it's 2-piece. It's got these set screws, so you can actually slide it forwards and backwards there. So I haven't seen anything like that on the market, so very innovative there. The third new item to me, not new on the market, but new to me, would be this mini Komodo. So I've been stuck on MOFO's pancakes for obvious good reason. So I'm going to try this guy out. I think this is a 2000 kV. I'll have to verify that. But anyways, I think now that we've got all the pieces here, we can actually get into putting this thing together. Okay, we're going to start with the skid and lower links. So you'll notice the skid is thicker at the front and thinner at the rear, and that is because of the angle to it. So it keeps the transmission level as the bottom angles. So make sure you get that the right orientation first. And then you get your links in there, and like I said earlier, your smooth offset pivots are going to go at the skid, and then the offsets with the hex go opposite. And you want to have those bent in the opposite direction. So the skid bends one way, and then the ones on the axle bend the opposite way to basically bring it back to straight. So what those are doing is they're making up for that angle. So they put a little more angle in and they take that angle out at the connection. So you end up with smoother articulation and less opportunity to bind. So for these guys, you're going to need some 12mm hardware. And the reason these go on first is due to the skid. And you can see there, once that's installed, it blocks the mount points for those lower links. So those are actually recessed in these holes. So this is a blind mount. So you've got to do these first. So we'll get these installed and then we'll come back and see what's next. Next up, we're going to get this transmission skid attached to the frame. So I've got some 8s for the 2 side holes. And then for that center hole, you can see there's not a lot of width of plastic. So I've got, I believe, a 3 for that one. Of course, if you protruded into that space, depending on which way your transmission was, I don't think it would interfere with your transmission gears unless you had a super long screw. But I would recommend 2 8s and a 3 for each side on this. So I'm going to get these attached to the rail and then we'll come back. Moving right along, got that skid plate installed, and I went ahead and added in the upper links. So I used the Mazz recommended starting point, which is the upper for the rear and the lower for the front. And I used 8mm hardware, and it comes out basically flush with the micro nut. So you could use 10s if you wanted a little extension, but you're definitely going to want to use some thread locker on that as well. So here, now that this is installed, you can see kind of the orientation of the links. So the lowers bend outwards and these uppers bend inwards, and then they're opposite at the axle end. So you want to pay attention to the way you've got them installed. Make sure they're all facing the same way and facing the correct way. But I think now we're ready to get those sliders on, and that'll cover up all this ugly hardware and make that look pretty clean. Well, I got the sliders on, and then off, and then on, and then off. Repeat about 5 times. As you can see, the inside edges are a little raw there. So I had to take them off and do a little sanding to get the fitment right, to bring them in just a little bit on the width. But that is something that Mazz warned me I may have to do. It was pretty easy. You just kind of took them off like this, laid them on some sandpaper, and kind of went to town there. And just took a little bit of test fitting, and you can see I took off about as much as I could there. Those pockets are about as shallow as I can get them. They're resting right on the screw heads, but that happened to be the exact point to make it work. So that allows the body to just drop on here with just a hair bit of friction on the sides, but not enough to put any pressure on the frame. Before, originally I couldn't fit it on at all, and then through the process there was a point where I thought it was good, but I realized I was actually having to kind of squeeze the frame to get it to fit on there, and I didn't want to flex this, didn't want to put any pressure on the resin body. So overall I'm happy with the fitment. But one thing that I did notice in taking these sliders on and off was this front screw and nut here. Looks like it's going to be an issue potentially with these upper links, because these are in the low position, so they're right here next to it. Now on the rear, I don't think there's going to be any issue because the upper links are in the high position, so they're pretty far away from it. So I think I can solve this with some little Injora aluminum spacers. So I think that may be the next thing, is get the sliders back off, space these, make sure that's all missing right there, there's no conflict, and I think we'll be good to move forward. All right, back with those aluminum spacers installed for the upper links, so that got those off of the frame almost as much as the micro nut. They're not as thick, but they're going to do the trick. And if you look closely down here, you can see the ends of 2 pieces of hardware. So those are actually from the upper links. So I snipped those 10s down to probably 9s, trying to get those flush with the end of the micro nut there. Just thinking that lower link might come up, and then also the drive shaft is going to be on one side here, depending on the direction of the motor, but just trying to allow as much clearance there as possible. And then the same with these screws down here. I swapped in, I think, like a 4mm for those guys, trying to get those flush as well, and that looks like that's going to be perfect, because these are, of course, are going to angle inward, but that looks like plenty of clearance there. So I think I'm happy with that initial setup. We'll get these little slivers of metal out of the way. So I think the next thing on the agenda here is to get some axles hung under this guy. So I've got the links on there, and I've already got the shocks built with the oil in it. So I'm gonna get this stuff assembled and I'll be right back. All right, it's starting to look like a cheat code. Of course, the nose is a little low without the magnets stacked in there, but you get the idea. I'm already getting very excited about this build. So let me remove this distraction, get that out of the way, and we'll talk about this axle install here. So for the shocks, I ended up using those Injora aluminum spacers there at the top. I used some narrower ones on the bottom. Definitely had to use them at the top to get the shock body off of the frame at this angle. Keep those nice and free, and man, these shocks feel good. These are definitely my favorite oiled shocks, but back was pretty easy. And then after I got it installed, if you take a look at that link riser, you can see I moved it forward one position, which I believe is the furthest forward, and you can do that after the fact with those set screws, so that is super convenient to kind of tune it as you go. So I kicked that drive shaft output up in hopes to kind of bend it right there with the lower high clearance links. Keep that up and clear out of the way. So that is the rear end, pretty simple. And then the front, basically the same. Got the spacers at the top. Did not use them at the bottom. You can see there. And that's because of these big oversized knuckles and the CVDs. So at full throw, they're right there with like a hair of clearance to that hardware. So if you move that lower point out, definitely going to be limiting your turning, or you're going to have to gouge out the knuckles, which I have done before, but there wasn't any need for it on the front. This is nice and smooth. So the only thing I noticed on the front was I can't get down to full compression right down the middle, and that is the conflict here of the magnet mounts and the back of the servo. So luckily with these threaded rod ends here, I can screw these out. So hopefully I can lengthen my lowers, kick those out, get a little more caster, and tuck the back of the servo down. So I think I'm going to pull this front axle back off, do a little twisting of links to give me new lengths. That's tough to say, but that's the setup so far. I think there's a little more to go to get kind of perfect travel right down the middle, but everywhere else I think I'm happy with it so far. So moving right along. Well, after a little tweaking, I think I've gotten this thing to work. Look at that, look how close that is. Just squeaking by right there. So you can see why I've got to have that servo on the furthest back position, because this thing is so snub-nosed. But it looks like it's going to work. So I'm going to get this on a tripod and I'll show you what I did. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So I was almost 100% successful, but as I was looking at this, I realized that the servo itself was getting up higher than the magnets, so it was actually hitting the underside of the hood. So it didn't matter if I could get that extra travel out of the shock, I would be hitting the servo on the underside of the hood before I even got that in reality. So you can see I took my shock point from that top rear position. I just slid it down to the bottom position there. So that is actually giving me full compression, and it stops the servo before it hits this battery tray, and it keeps the servo top right below the magnet top, so it's not going to hit the hood. So that was achieved by lengthening the lowers. So I unscrewed both ends of the lowers 2 full turns to lengthen those, and then I was able to get 1 full turn to tighten and shorten these uppers. And so what that did was give me a lot better caster. But even with that caster and the shock in the original position, I was still hitting the tray anyways. I mean, I was also hitting the underside of the hood, but this seemed to be the compromise. So I get full usage out of that shock. I've got a lot better caster now, and really lowering that shock position did not raise the front end at all because I kicked the axle out further. So you can see there it's still sitting nice and level with the rear, although the rear is mounted much higher. So it looks like that's all going to work. So the next thing I think we're going to focus on here is this middle section. Well, I got the servo adjusted, the motor tested and installed, and we're all good, right? Well, not exactly. If you look closely, you'll notice the cab is sitting a little nose high. So while I knew I was going to have a tight fit with the forward-facing motor to the magnet mount, I was not expecting to actually have a collision with the hood. So I don't know if you can see in there very well, but the bottom of the windshield, bottom of the hood is sitting on the top of the motor can in there. You can see it right there, it's touching. So the cab will not fully seat down on the sliders, and of course that motor will be spinning, so we can't have that. So that means I'm going to have to flip this motor to the rear, or else look around in another build and try to pull a smaller, lower motor to swap in. But I was really hoping to use this guy, so I think I'm going to stick with it. What's going to kill it is not being able to run the tray in this low forward position. So if I flip everything, that's going to push this guy back, which will obviously be outside of the cab. So that stinks. I'm going to be losing quite a bit of battery and ESC mounting real estate within the body. So anyways, I think the next step for me is flipping this assembly and kind of seeing where that ends up in the cab, what that does to the tray, and it should allow the body to fully seat down and solve that issue. So I think that's the next step for me. Okay, looks like option 2 is also a no-go. So you can see here that the motor is going to be sticking out the back of the cab, which if I test fit this and planned for it to begin with, I could have taken a Dremel and taken some material out of the back cab here for it pretty easily. But now that it's painted and sealed, I don't want to Dremel into the nice body. So I think this motor is going to be a no-go, since it's not going to work in either direction. So I've got a MOFO RC NanoBam here with his aluminum mount. So you can see here the aluminum mount is thinner, so it doesn't stick it as forward as much. And then I believe this is also going to sit lower overall, and of course the motor is a smaller diameter. So this ought to work, and it shouldn't be an issue with length. Now that the shock is disconnected from the magnet mount, I can take that magnet mount and move it forward. So I can gain a little more clearance here. It's no longer going to be an issue with the servo if I move it forward one position. So I think I can make everything work out with this NanoBam. It's just going to be a little unfortunate that I'm going to have to save this for another build down the road. But man, that red sure would have been nice with the red cab, but that's how it goes sometimes. So I think we're going to change plans here. So I'm going to get this mounted up, tested, and try to get us back to where we were here. All right, I've got my new motor option mounted up to a stock transmission. So I just wanted to kind of compare these a little bit before I get it installed. So it looks to be about maybe 5 millimeters longer than the FuryTech. But then it also looks like side by side, it's hard to tell here, and it was kind of hard to measure, but it looks like the FuryTech's about 12 millimeters taller to the top of the motor. So this will definitely make it under the magnet mount and under the hood. Now I'm just concerned about the lower links potentially hitting the can, but because we changed the bump stop of that front axle and shock mount to limit that servo up travel, may not be a problem. This may work out fine, but there you go. Either way we go here, we're going to have a couple nice looking motor mount setups, but I think we're going to end up with this nice all blacked out setup for this guy. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that mounted up and cross your fingers. Well, would you look at that? I think everything is gonna work out just fine. So look at that, nice and level on the sliders. So let's take this cab off, take a look inside here. So you can see that NanoBAM is sitting quite a bit lower than the FuryTech motor. And because of the forward length of that thing, you can see I moved the magnet mount forward 2 positions, which was easy to do since it's no longer a mount point for the shocks. And then because of the shock adjustment and servo limiting here, I've got just a sliver of space. So that is just perfect there. So I'm still getting the full usage out of the shocks, and at full compression, I've got nowhere near any interference with the motor can on the links there. So that's good news. And it'll let me slide this tray as far forward as I would like here towards this transmission to get it fully kind of encapsulated within the cab shape, basically. But looks like everything is going to work out super well with that motor. Another thing I noticed as mocking this up was a few features here on the new design. So this cross brace, you can see it's cut out on the bottom, and that is perfectly fitting for the upper links. And then the bottom of this tray as well, same kind of thing. It is cut up right here, so that actually works out perfectly for the links and the drive shaft. So it just gives it a lot of clearance right there on the up travel, so nothing is going to hit. So it's one of those things I didn't even notice until I got it all up and was working the suspension, and then started to really appreciate some of the tweaks of the new design there. And I guess one other thing I failed to mention, in mounting the transmission to the skid, since the skid is thicker in the front, you're going to need an 8. For the rear, you can use like a 5 or a 6 millimeter. And then for the top, you're going to want a 3 millimeter little shorty for that guy. But everything is looking like it's going to work out well. So I think with this kind of full change of direction here on motors, it's making me think, why don't we do a full change of direction on ESCs? So I've got this brand new MOFO RC ROCKWOLF ESC. So this is brushless and brush capable, but it comes pre-programmed basically for the NanoBAM in brushless mode. It also comes with a free programmer. So I think we're going to get this out, hook it up, bind it, and do a little motor test, see what this thing's all about. Time for a quick motor test, but before we do that, let's take a quick look at this ROCKWOLF ESC here. So it's a pretty similar layout to like a Lizard Pro. You've got your switch, your battery, your motor, and then your receiver cable. It's about the same footprint as the Ultimate here. About the same width, same length if you include the switch. About the same thickness with all the plugs. The only difference is this is really nice in the case because you can just stand it up like that, double side it down. Very easy to mount something like this versus this guy, you know, you can mount it this way pretty easy. But I mean, you got to get creative. You can stick this, I'm sure, multiple ways, but it's very easy to mount this nice little case, which I really like that feature about this. But we're going to toss that out and we're going to go full MOFO on this build. And since this is pre-tuned for this guy, I think it's going to be a match made in heaven. So it does come with a little tuning device, USB-C cable to your computer, and then you plug this in. You do need to power this up with a battery to program it. But since we are good to go, don't need to program it. I already have tested it with drive shafts. You can see I popped those in, and these were super easy. I didn't have to take anything apart. I had enough slack to just install them both and then hit the screws, so that was perfect. A lot of times you've got to unhook a shock, a link or something, give yourself a little bit more room to work in there, but those went in super easy. So I'll pop those in to do a quick test on my own to make sure I didn't have to program this and switch directions for the motor, and luckily I don't. It is spinning the correct way. So we're going to go ahead and plug this up and just see how easy this is. So signal for me is towards the board, channel 1 is down, so this is going to be right there for channel 2. And then we'll get a battery plugged in. I'm already bound to this receiver. And there we go. So we're on 2S, only 1 beat, but that may just be what it is. You can see my wheel weight's spinning there in the correct direction. Let's get this up off of the table. Super smooth. Wow, that has got to be the smoothest kind of low speed to high speed. Like there was no feeling of a transition. I mean, it's just fully just responding to the pressure of my finger. There's no kind of jump or anything leaving like an FOC state. Let's slow it back down. Wow. All right. So this thing is impressive on the table here. Cannot wait to get 3S on it. And apparently this is also 4S capable if you're just insane. But I think now that we've kind of seen it, man, this thing is just super easy. Basically plug and play in this scenario. Didn't have to even bother with the programmer, which is super nice. So gonna see if I can't get these electronics situated, and then we'll move on to something else. Change of plans. As I started fitting the electronics in, man, I realized how small that space is. So I decided to go ahead and glue in the magnets. Before I had the electronics in, just so I had, you know, a lot of clear space to do that. So I'm letting these guys set up. Obviously I just glued in the underside of the hood, so I'm letting the weight of this kind of set those in. So I figured we'd jump to wheels and tires while we wait on that to set up. So I've got these Boom Racing 53mm TPDs. So I've used these before in their larger diameter. I believe they were maybe 60s, I'm not sure. But these being 53s ought to work well with this little cab. These FJ bodies seem to want smaller tires on the builds, at least the ones I've done. So I'm going to start with these guys. Really nice soft compound. These are the black compound, which is their super soft. And for the wheels, this may answer the question of why I put such heavy brass axles on this guy. So we are going a little bit further with WTMicro. So I've got these bronze with black ring wheels here. So he sent me these and he told me these are a little smaller diameter than typical, but he said they made up to the Boom Racing tires perfectly, because these are made for Boom Racing's wheels, which are a little bit smaller. So this is going to be a match made in heaven. So we're going to have basically full WTMicro for the aesthetics on this guy, and I think the bronze, this is like a dark bronze. I think this is going to go really well with the red and the white. So I'm going to get these guys mounted up, and I've got another little piece to tie it all together. I've got Enjora's little scale hubs I'm going to use. So I'm going to get these mounted on super quick, and we'll see what it looks like, maybe at least upside down. Okay, got these wheels and tires mounted up, and man, they look great. Fit just perfectly on this rig. And I'm sure you probably suspected I had a spare wheel and tire waiting in the wings, but what you did not probably realize was I had a cage waiting in the wings as well. So in waiting on these magnets to set up and dry, I decided to go ahead and move the build forward a little bit and get this cage mounted up. So let's talk a little bit more about this cage. So this is the ECX Barrage cage set. It's like a $10 set. So it comes with a few more pieces on the set than I have actually mounted up here, and I'll show a photo of that. But I ended up having to remove some of those for shock fitment there, and then of course I didn't need those sliders under the door there, so those came off. And then you'll also notice I've got the rear brace removed, and I've got these black aluminum crossbars sitting out here. So I ended up pulling out that brace and swapping in a couple of crossbars to get that cage to sit down flush on the top of the shock towers. And I'll show a photo of that as well. So I used those guys to actually put in some little zip ties to the cage down to those aluminum cross braces to actually hold this guy down. So that is nice and secure and sitting level on top of those shock towers. And it ends up just being the perfect height, top and bottom. And scooted it forward just a little bit. Had to do a little Dremel work on the underside to create a little slot to let those shock towers slide back a little further, let the cage slide up just a little further to lessen that gap right there. But I wanted a little bit of clearance to be able to get the cab on and off. But overall, I think this came out looking pretty sweet. So I'm kind of one-handed here. Let me see if I can rotate this guy around, give you a back view of the cage. But that worked out perfect with this little small tire size. Fit in there just perfectly. So super happy with that. I think that definitely rounds out the look of it. So now I think we've got wheels and tires and the magnets glued in, so I think that leaves some electronics to finish up. Wow, talk about a challenge phase with those electronics. I don't think I've taken that long on any install in quite some time. But as you saw, everything did ultimately find a home on those little sliders. It's just not a lot of space. So before I get the roof off and we take a little look inside, the first thing I had to do was actually download the software from MOFO RC to be able to set the low voltage cutoff. Super easy to do. It's a $0 purchase on his site. He emails it to you. Download the software. All you need is a USB-C cable. So you've got to plug that up to the programmer. You've got to plug that into your ESC, and you've got to put a battery to your ESC. Super simple to change it and or activate, I guess, the low voltage and then set it. So he's got instructions on his website as well, so you can check out MOFO RC for those. But after I had that done, dove into the fitment here, so let's take a look at that. So the battery for me was the hardest part, and I ended up using the smallest battery I had, which is a 180 milliamp hour Palm Power 3S. And you can see I kind of had to angle it inward a little bit The wires come out the side over here, so a little bit of a bulk there. Just could not squeeze it between the cab and that upper link mount riser on the frame there. But ultimately, everything worked out well. You can see kind of the coiled up slack for the lights for the cab. And then the tray had plenty of space for the ESC back there. So very happy with it in the end. Everything's pretty low, except for the motor wire coil. But I think now let's get this cab off, take a quick look at the headlights here and get it plugged in. And do this blind through the motor wire. There we go. Snake the antenna through the back window. Boom, those magnets do all the work. And look at that, I forgot to actually turn it on. Turn on the transmitter. And I'll just use tweezers. I'll cheat since I've already got the cab on. Nice. So still one beep with 3S, so that's just the deal there. But we are good to go. Look at that creep. Those warm white lights look super good. Very classic, I think, for an FJ. Alright, so I don't even want to get into a tabletop test just yet. I think the next thing I want to do is actually get this roof glued on and be done with the shoe goo. Okay, back with the roof glued in place, and that guy's set up overnight. And man, that is just looking great. So there we have the finished product sitting nice and low. Just a killer stance right there. And those colors, wow. That mica red with the black grille, the white lettering and the white roof just work perfect with those dark bronze wheels. I don't know if it could look any better than that. But of course, we're gonna give it a shot. So if you're familiar with any of my builds, you'll probably know what's coming next. So I've got one last little surprise for you. All right, let's talk alternate wheels and tires. So for the tire portion of it, I already had these Boom Racing Hustler MT Richard Vasquez edition picked out. So that's why I had the 53 millimeter in my head earlier, but these are the same black super soft compound. I've actually used these before on my other cheat code build. Very nice tread, kind of a hybrid AT-MT, semi-aggressive, but super pliable, nice soft foam in there. And of course they've got a little bit smaller opening because it's a Boom Racing tire. So I had planned to definitely use some lightweight WTMicro resin wheels just to not change any of the tuning balance. So I had a set of these Ray wheels that I've had for a little while from him in the polished. They're nice and deep. Not as deep as Island style or as wide, but a nice deep dish nonetheless. The problem was I only had 4 of these. So when I placed another order with Matthew, I asked him if he could throw in a spare Ray or maybe another set of Rays. And he sent me out these guys. So these are actually a smaller diameter than this Ray right here. So these are actually the same diameter as these smaller ones that are on the truck. So how did he know to color match the red mica ring for me? Well, he didn't. When I got these, they were in pieces, so the ring is a separate resin print, and I'll show a photo of that. So that gave me the opportunity to get a little creative, and I had a little bit of paint left over, and I didn't have any chrome to match this, so I decided to color match the paint job. So I think these came out really good, and I just super glued the ring in place. And you can see these are not as wide as the full-size 1.0 Ray, but they're the exact same size as this, so they're going to work perfect with these. Shouldn't change really the offset or much of the overall stance look. So anyways, we're going to get these mounted up, and I've actually got one kind of pre-mounted here, ready to go. but I think these came out just really cool. Give it that last little bit of custom touch, that color coordination. So I'm gonna get these guys mounted up and we'll see what this looks like against some bright wheels. Well, if you've ever wondered what perfection looks like, you're looking at it. And man, does it look good. Wow. I think it's going to be a crime to call these alternate wheels and tires. I mean, that's just a match made in heaven. And those SSD hubs just tie it all together at the front. Just super, super sick. Very happy with that. Let's see, let me flip it around. Take a look at the backside here. Oh, that matching spare, that looks so good. Man, just killer, just killer. Okay, enough drooling here. So I think now we are actually at the end, so we can get a battery in this guy, get it on the scales, and actually see where we ended up with the build. All right, figured we'd do a quick weigh-in without the battery first. Let's let that settle down. Look at that. Are we gonna hit 420? That's too funny. Good bias starting out. 5743 to the front, and that should only improve once we place the battery in there. So I think we'll call it at 420 overall. All right, so I'm gonna get a battery in there and we'll reweigh this. Okay, I've got the battery in and I've let it settle out here. So it looks like we're about 16 grams heavier with that little battery in there, and it did not affect the bias at all. So we're still sitting at 57% to the front, which is great right out of the gate on the build, so I can't complain there. So anyways, that's the stats. Figured the final step here before we actually get this on all fours is to go ahead and take a look at this overdrive and give this motor ESC combo a little test here. So I left the cab off so we can get a good look at that motor. So let's take a look at this. So this is 214 overdrive, so that ought to be about 14%. Nice and quiet. Just super smooth. So just great reaction with this motor and ESC. Just so smooth. I cannot find a transition point. I mean, it just feels super linear with your finger pull here. Yeah, I cannot find like an FOC point coming in or out of on this at all. Just so smooth. So great job to MOFO on the tuning of this guy out of the box. I mean, this is a match made in heaven right here. And man, plenty of speed, it looks like, on 3S. No problem. All right, so let's get this guy off the stand, onto the table, and take a look at it actually driving. Okay, the moment has arrived. Let's give this guy a little test here. We'll creep this guy up. See how slow we can get it. Pretty dang slow. Look at that. All right. Moving right along. Check out that articulation. problem. Look at that. Quick reset. We'll come back at it. Nice tire squish, and that looks good. So not as much articulation as some of my extreme builds, but I think this is about as much articulation as I want on a cheat code, which is plenty with these LT shocks. So we're gonna queue up here for the ramp. See where the RTI is here. Get that back wheel slightly off the ground. Looks like about there, almost to the top of the ramp, not bad. But pretty dang good articulation, even for a cheat code. Man, this isn't really doing it justice. I got to get this on a course that actually will test it a little more than just some minor articulation. But I'm really happy with the motor ESC combo. I think that's just super responsive. Just couldn't be happier with having a new option besides FuryTech. Not that there's anything wrong with FuryTech, but they kind of had the market cornered. Minus, I guess, Dinky RC. That's one that I have not tried, but I don't know if I will now that this ROCKWOLF ESC is out. This may just take the cake for me, just super easy. And so far, just super great. All right. Well, here we are at the end of yet another build, and I think this was a successful one. I am just blown away with the look of this thing. Just super happy with it. The cage on the back just pulls it all together. Nice finished look, and very happy I made the decision to go to the XL rails with this build. Initially, I don't think I mentioned, I was going to use the normal length TI rails, but in mocking this up, you see how long this cage is and this extension back here, so I figured that would just kill my departure angle. So I decided to go with the stretched wheelbase, which, as you can see, puts that rear end at a great departure angle. You can basically stand the truck up straight, so I think that was a good decision. And I think overall the look is just killer with a little bit of extra length. But you know what that means. I've still got some regular length TI rails, so I did order up another cab, and Mazz sent me out a nice set of FJ sliders. So got another one planned, going to be my original paint scheme, my original wheels that I had planned for this. Kind of changed course and redid everything when I went to the XL for the cage. I switched wheels, which switched paint. That's how it goes sometimes, but that was kind of the theme with this build overall. We ended up switching motors midway through just for fitment, but I think that worked out great with the NanoBam, and just a blessing in disguise being able to use the new ROCKWOLF ESC from MOFO, test that guy out, and really happy with that. And then all of this was made possible with these nice sliders here from Mazz Designs, and they should be available at some point in the future on his site. But just a great collaboration with Matthew at WTMicro to make those work for his bodies. It benefits both companies, I think, if you have a cheat code, you probably want to get a hold of one of these little cab only bodies for it. And if you get a WTMicro body, it opens up the path to the cheat code chassis, I guess, if you will. So it's a good option for both guys. Glad they got together and collaborated on the design. And I think it benefits all of us out here in the SCX24 community. But just super, super happy with it. Loving the WTMicro rims for that final touch. And either set, I think, just looks phenomenal. Very, very happy with these little Boom Racing tires. These things seem to fit the bill very nice for these small tire builds. But I think with that said, we're going to wrap this guy up. And I want to thank you for coming along on the build. Definitely hope you learned something. I know I always do, and definitely did on this one. Some new items, new ESC, a lot of fun. But with that said, until next time, thanks for watching.